But without further ado, welcome everybody to the Talent Analytics Show. My name is Stacy Broadwell. I will be your host. And today we have Amanda Cole from eTeki. Amanda, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stacy. I'm so glad to be here. I appreciate you having me and welcoming me to the TechRecruit community.
Absolutely. Now, tell us a little bit about your role.
Yeah, I'm with eTeki. I'm the vice president, and I have my experience really lies within working with companies that leverage the amazing area of contingent workforces and how they deliver services to businesses. I also have experiences that align with eTeki around HR tech platforms that do skill-based matching. And so that's what brought me to eTeki, and now I've been with the company 5 years. So that's kind of where I got to you today.
That's a very good run. I like that background too. So tell us about what we're going to be talking about today.
So what I've prepared for you today is kind of a walk through what the analytics around pre-submittal tech interviews include and how companies use the data as a catalyst for making changes to their recruiting process, as well as what the outcomes look like in IT hiring when you leverage that pre-submittal tech interview versus only doing technical interviews after a hiring manager has invested their time and energy into reviewing resumes.
Really cool. Awesome. Well, I will turn it over to you, and I'll keep an eye on the chat and monitor the Facebook Live as well.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if I could be that multi-talented and talk, so glad to lean on you there. So let me do the sharing here. Let me know when you can see my screen and all of the everything in full glory. Let's see. Make sure there's not anything obscuring. All right, is that good? Awesome.
Yeah, perfect.
All righty. So without further ado, so there are cues and tactics for restructuring your processes. And we typically, recruiting teams typically see them as just frustration. We know there's a lot of noise, a lot of clutter out in the market when it comes to reviewing resumes. It's well documented, right? So rather than saying, well, I just can't do anything about it, and I do enough to keep up on sourcing, pre-screening, and I do my due diligence on keeping up with technologies to be able to talk to hiring managers and source for candidates. Like, how am I also supposed to keep up with the terminology and the knowledge to screen? There are ways to actually work with technology professionals to get that tech screen, that understanding of a technology professional's experience before the hiring manager gets frustrated with that lack of match. And that's what a pre-submittal tech screen is. So one of the major issues, whether it's a fake resume or a bad actor, I figured we could do a couple of polls if that's okay with you, Stacy. So either here in Zoom or on Facebook, two-part question. If you know a recruiter or a hiring manager who's been burned by either fake resume or bad actor, say yes, and then what have you called these bad actors? Because different people have different terminology for them. Would love to hear what the community here has to say about that. So we'll come back and do a check-in in a few minutes, and I'd love to hear you read out what people have to say about it. All right, so we're going to look at a couple of different cases here. So this is a pretty high volume, but regionally focused staffing firm that focuses on Fortune 500 companies, and they were dealing with fakes. So if you look at the technical interview for them, when they started using pre-submittal technical interviews, it was because of the feedback they were getting from hiring managers that the people who they were talking to were not the people that were showing up for technical interviews, the people who were showing up at work weren't the same people that were representing themselves in the hiring process. Okay. So what did we do? What did that technical interview step do with this company? How did they change the tactic? So they did some changes in their pre-screening protocols. Now, you notice there's still some variability because there's certainly spikes in particular technologies. There's spikes when you have new recruiters come into an organization and you've got to teach them the new pre-screening protocols that maybe they didn't use at another organization. When you have other vendors that you're working with, so there's a lot of different factors, but over time, as you can see, for the most part, when they introduced these different pre-screening protocols, and I'll share what some of those tactics are in a few minutes, they significantly decreased the problems they were having when they introduced the video pre-submittal technical interview. Okay. So company 2, they also decreased significantly their fakes over time. This is like an enterprise size staffing firm, deals heavily with layered kind of staffing, wanted to quickly get candidates screened in and out, wasn't looking to necessarily submit those interviews to the hiring manager, but really just needed a checkpoint. Should we submit the candidate or not? They were seeing significant challenges with those fakes, with unqualified candidates. And so what we were able to do with them over time was they were able to say to their sourcing partners, your pre-screening techniques have to change because the threshold in terms of your MSAs with us won't allow this any longer. And we can't continue to put our reputation on the line with hiring managers submitting these types of candidates. Company 3, kind of a newer type of client. But again, kind of that initial, they saw that definitely adopting this, they were able to identify pre-submittal technical interviews, definitely caught those bad actors in the hiring process, brought in more in the company to use those technical interviews as a way to really qualify authenticity as well as candidate experience. And then we actually provided those best practices adopted by other companies, and they were able to quickly taper off the number of bad actors that are seen in their screens. So what do some of those look like? So Sam Valou, who has presented at some of the industry conferences, who we're glad to have as Director of Key Accounts at our company, has done some professional development in the industry on some of these topics. I picked three that we share when companies are considering how to restructure some of their pre-screening protocols that are quick and easy. And I figured, Stacy, that your community might find these kind of quick and easy ways to improve their process. So do you mind if I share these?
No, that'd be great.
Okay. So when you're looking and doing that research before you reach out to a candidate, you want to see, are they established online? And I get that a lot of tech professionals are more leery of being on LinkedIn, right? But the age of that LinkedIn profile, is it proportional to how long they have been working in the industry? There should be a proportional number of connections, even if they don't have this robust profile with their entire descriptions. Somebody should have endorsed them. There should be some decent testimonials there, those references about that person. Once you talk to that person, when you're live on the phone with them, start further down on the resume. Don't be that recruiter that talks about the most recent project. Start way down. Ask them who the project manager was on that. Look for that person on LinkedIn right then and there. Try and match who they are referring to, so that you can validate that and make sure and connect those dots. Because oftentimes that's where you can see that some things don't match up. Another way, and this is one of Sam's infamous tricks, is when you ask about an office location. So eTeki used to be in the Rocky Point Center here in Tampa, and it had 8 stories. And so, if somebody were to call me and say, so what floor did you work on when you worked at eTeki? Was it the 9th floor, the 10th floor? And they could look up by Googling Rocky Point Center when they asked me which location was I at, and count the number of floors just by looking at the Google Maps picture. And if I said, oh, yeah, I was on the 10th floor, and they could clearly see that there was no such thing as the 10th floor, or saying, where did you go to lunch? And looking up that, there was no Applebee's close by. So that kind of gives you some clues on how to suss out whether or not that might be a bad actor. So, all right. There's definitely more of those. Sam put out an ebook that if folks are interested, that he puts out on Twitter from time to time, a link to it. So, all right. So, Stacy, could you check in on the poll and see which terms folks may have used to describe some of this activity that goes on?
Yes. So we have April Pedersen, who had said that they call them not right.
Not right. I love it.
Disqualified.
Disqualified. Love it. Okay. Any others? Those are good ones. Disqualified. DQ. All right. Good. All right. Let's go on. So next up, we're going to look at some recruiting metrics. So my question to you is, I'm going to talk about some metrics. What metric are you focusing on right now? How are you tracking it? Obviously, the metrics I'm going to talk about may not be the ones that are your highest priority, but it's always important as professionals that we are focused on kind of those outcomes, and outcome-based evaluation is the best type of evaluation. So encourage one another to always be tracking and evaluating yourself to become your best self. All right. So this particular example here is a high growth, kind of early adopter mindset type staffing company. They involve hiring managers in setting the scope of the pre-submittal tech interview. They share the video of every candidate who scores like above the top tier percentages of a of kind of that what the scoring would look like to the hiring manager. Their overall submit to offer is a 3.18, and submit to hire is a 3.4. So you'll see in this case, they have a pretty high number of candidates they need to screen to get to the submit. They were one of those that had a lot of bad actors. And so kind of overall that brought their initial number of candidates to screen high, because in the early days they had a lot of candidates that were bad actors. But when you really start to look at overall, you know, they can screen 4 candidates, right, and have a hire. They could, submit 4 candidates and have a hire, right? Once they get to that interview, they can pretty reliably have 2 candidates interviewed and know that one's going to get hired. From the interview, and we'll get into it a little more later, but it's really giving the hiring manager a bird's eye view. So this next example is a company that uses both a one-way video interview for the hiring manager to get to know the candidate just from a communication skills and a general soft skills perspective initially, and a pre-submittal technical interview. All the positions are working remotely, so it's super duper important that the experience is validated, not just the competency, and that all of those soft skills are really important. Their submit to offer and hire are both 1.3 for this company's recruiting team. They're just amazing overall because they have a process that has been honed to perfection. So, you know, I give them kudos for what they've been able to do. And pretty much it's every offer is accepted. So pretty cool. So this next one, so a former technical professional leads the sourcing team in this particular example. He's now a project manager, and they use pre-submittal technical interviews to market their NPCs. And in this particular case, they combine, you know, this person who has past technical experience along with the pre-submittal technical interview to then take a proven qualified technical person and go out and market them and get them a position and literally have them a job within 6 weeks. So, you know, just different use cases. I thought I turned that off. So just different use cases of ways that it works to move your hiring process ahead, you know, in a faster and a higher quality manner. So this next one is an established IT solutions company. They do some outsourcing of tech professionals, but a lot of their hiring is internal. Their talent acquisition team uses it to make submit, no submit decisions primarily, versus actually sharing the interview reports with any hiring manager. Their ratios are definitely lower than industry averages. They're at like a 6.1 for submit to hire and a 4.6 for submit to offer. But they're not at what we would consider maximum effectiveness for pre-submittal tech interviews because they aren't proactively sharing the video. And so when we switch, I'm going to show you a couple of more corporate case studies to show you the difference in kind of more hiring manager direct involvement. I'm a quote person. Anybody on my team, Stacy will tell you, every meeting I come to, I bring a quote. So companies, in this quote for me, it's that companies don't typically understand the fiscal impact of maintaining the status quo. And this quote, I don't know if you recognize the name, but is the former CEO of Disney. And when it comes to doing technical interviews, it's the fiscal impact on the IT department. And it's the revenue per employee that a company can actually make if the IT team isn't doing technical interviews. And so when we look at optimizing IT hiring and the typical IT department, in this example is from a travel and leisure company that kind of pre-COVID, they had 300 submits, 300. Now you can imagine that's a lot of different staffing partners submitting to one hiring manager that are all saying, these are my best candidates. You have to check them out. And all of the follow-up calls and the follow-up emails of saying, have you looked at the profile yet? And the hiring manager looking through every single one of those resumes and the blur that they have to be in at this point. And finally deciding, well, I'll throw out a third of them and moving forward with actually talking to 200. And literal conversation internally with, I think we should go ahead with 200 more in the panel interviews. And they ended up with 25 interviews for one hire. So, and this is not an uncommon kind of situation. So once they actually did pre-submittal technical interviews, what happened was they moved to interviewing in the technical department 2 candidates for one hire. So if we were to calculate that up, there's a metric of a loss of revenue per employee or the revenue per head count, okay? And that amount varies by industry. Your energy sector is like 1.7 million per employee a year. And so, when we calculate this, we take an average across all sectors. But when I'm talking to somebody about this, we'll look at what is that for their company. And no one really thinks through that loss of revenue. So when you look at, a typical IT department or a typical company and think about just in the IT department alone, we're not talking about the sourcing tools, the talent acquisition department's time, the loss of revenue for them, just the IT department, if they have 50 openings a year, And just 2 interview rounds, that's $18 million a year impact with loss of revenue included. Has anybody ever presented that in this group or to you?
I don't see any comments on that. I certainly do know that there is massive value in having a pre-screening tool to ensure the quality of the submits before they even get to in front of the hiring manager. So I think this is really valuable.
Looking at another corporate scenario. In this one, the submittal interviews. The submittal interviews were driven by a director of a department director, and at the time of the data poll, there were just shy of about 200 pre-submittal interviews, and overall there had been just over 20 hires. And they'd ranged in from computer science interns to software engineers that included front end, back end, React, software agnostic software engineers, multiple levels, data science with R, data science with Python, kind of a wide variety of different professionals. And the particulars around their hiring process were 5 technical interview rounds, and there was a range of anywhere from 2 to 4 tech professionals in each of those rounds. And so in looking at using the pre-submittal technical interview, because that's the only place where they were able to really qualify, despite having automated assessments before the interview rounds previously. Using the pre-submittal tech interview, they were able to actually reduce it down to 2 technical interview rounds internally instead of the previous 5. And just in that 6 months, they've saved a significant chunk, investing only $11 million internally, including that loss of revenue amount, instead of what they would have spent, $24 million, or what it would have cost them, which is $24 million. So that's kind of the different use cases, the different data around the use cases of the analytics that we're generating here in the industry around technical pre-submittal interviews. So what questions do you have, and what questions does the community have?
I don't see any questions at the moment. So eTeki then is the platform that is the pre-screening tool for that stage, for the pre-interview stage. Is that right?
We're one of the market players. We're not the only, but yeah, we're one.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question.
I mean, and staffing firms have been doing technical interviews pre-submission for years, right? It's not a new concept.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it can be. It's certainly, if you're thinking about the. I'm trying to bring my my video back on. Do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Sure.
And we'll do side by side. Unless you had other slides.
No, that's it. That's the slides. Okay,
great. Let me bring my view on. There was a question in the chat. Are you able to see the chat?
Let's see. What level, entry, junior, senior of tech talent are the most tricky to screen? Oh, good question. So tricky is an interesting word. Is an interesting word choice. The model. So there's different models. The model that we recommend is a project-oriented interview, one that kind of leverages what we all know is more of the behavioral interview, but uses technical concepts as the probing scope component to the interview, so that regardless of where the candidate's experience has been, whether it's college projects or coding camp projects, they can answer. Or if they're mid to senior, they can talk about whatever those projects are. If it's an interview that's basically a Q&A, you don't need to pay a technical interviewer to do that. That's what your automated assessments are for.
Yeah. That can be a huge variable in that. And so the program works across small companies, large companies. You mentioned earlier in the show it being on the contingent workforce.
Well, that's just the delivery model. The delivery model.
That you guys deliver it for the contingency, your clients are contingent workforce?
Our delivery model is contingent. The interviewers themselves are independent contractors.
Explain that model. I don't understand how that works then.
So in order to be a technical interviewer, you need to be somebody who works in technology full-time, not somebody who's a full-time interviewer. So therefore, we don't employ interviewers solely for the purpose of interviewing. So the staffing industry has consultants that it uses to do interviews. Some companies use service platforms like eTeki, or they use other platforms. There are platforms like eTeki that are geared directly for corporate, and eTeki serves both in the corporate and the staffing world.
Okay. All right. So that's so any other questions in there regarding like the types of questions? So it would be geared more towards the technical, because those are like the harder positions to fill, like, because Definitely. The questions can be a little bit more. And you mentioned that they could be behavioral as well as technical, like a coding review.
Yeah. I mean, your best technical interviews are ones that have the candidate tell their story, why they're a good fit for the position, and then the interviewer uses technical concepts to poke holes in the candidate's story, right? So what version did you use? Why did you use it? What components of that did you use? How did that work? Why did you do it that way? Obviously I'm not technical, right? So I'm not gonna start pulling out the jargon here. But when it comes down to actually working through the technical detail of the coding language, the database, the approach, when all of those are brought together in the conversation, that's where the whole project comes into the picture. So, job description has a complete stack, and the conversation from the candidate is a whole comprehensive one. So it's Golang, it's Mongo, it's Express, it's Angular. They're talking the full comprehensive interview.
So this is an interesting distinction. So let's just posted something that you could be in the comments here, that you can actually be an eTeki interviewer and do freelance. So you can actually apply to be an interviewer. So I guess in my mind, I thought these were like a platform, like a tool that the candidate, the software engineer would log on to and actually do a test, but it's actually given verbally by another person in real life. It's not
correct.
Okay, that's interesting.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So yes, so that's where the delivery model is contingent. So they're independent contractor interviewers. Yeah.
Now I'm getting it, because I was like, where's this contingency delivery model on? I thought it was just a platform, you sign up for it. Okay, so it's actually people who are giving these technical reviews, pre-screening them before they go into the interview phase. Interesting. So in implementing this model into companies, what has been some of the challenges? I'm just curious, like when, because obviously it's a great solution. I mean, it saves time, it saves money, what have you. But what are some of the challenges? Is it more like for a smaller company, a larger company who has high volume, has to hire hundreds of software engineers? Where do you find you best fit in?
So the largest challenge is typically recruiters and IT coming together and making a joint agreement, right?
Okay.
That there's tension all the time with why are there so many unqualified candidates? Why aren't you accepting the candidates that I'm sending? And it's this constant push and pull. And I talked about that status quo, right? But it's change management. When are we willing to do something different and create a new norm in our recruiting process? And so that biggest challenge has been, how do we change the attitudes and the norms and no longer make qualifying and technical experience the hiring manager's responsibility?
So what does one need to be, or what background do they have to have? Do they have to have a technical background in order to help the delivery of this service?
Yeah.
Your interviewers
need to be a cloud architect if they're going to interview a cloud architect. They need to be using Kafka. They need to be using Kubernetes. They actually have to have direct hands-on experience using the tools and technologies they're going to interview for.
Oh, so these are like software engineers interviewing software engineers. That's brilliant.
Exactly.
This has been around for 5 years now?
Yes.
So when do you find that does this take up somebody's, if they're doing it freelance or however it is that it looks like it's a freelance opportunity, are they doing it full time? Is there so many needs for this, or is it something that they can do in their, as a part-time, side hustle?
It's a side hustle. It's a side hustle for tech professionals. Cool. Yeah, they do it evenings, weekends. If they're, they do it lunch hours, they do it between meetings.
Now, does the company ever have any stipulations, or the client, that there could be, I don't know, privacy issues, with, some companies don't even like to put what technologies that they're using within the job description. It's very vague sometimes. And maybe that's not a client for you guys.
I mean, that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons why we're one of the best secrets in the industry. We have to sign a lot of NDAs.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly.
We have to sign a lot of NDAs. Yeah.
Have you ever had
is what it is.
An interviewer who turned around and was like, doing the screening and said, I would like to work for this company? Has that ever happened? I'm just curious.
I think once in 5 years we've had to deal with that, but we've got a strong culture of integrity.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. It's amazing. We work with a lot of amazing people who have a passion for raising the standards in their profession, talking tech with their peers. Yes, they can make some side money doing what they enjoy, but they get to learn from each other as well, having these types of conversations.
Do you have any advice that you might give after the pre-screening and somebody has actually gone to the interview phase, right? So they've done their pre-screening, they've been submitted to the hiring manager. Do you have any advice that you'd give, teams on how to structure those interview processes once somebody's in the door? I mean, do you feel that panel interviews are best, one-on-ones? Do you have any advice there?
So, I would say setting up kind of guaranteed response times. I also say that panel interviews can be very intimidating to the candidate, right? And so from a candidate experience perspective, yes, it's efficient for the organization. It's efficient for scheduling with the candidate. And yes, you're trying to reduce time to hire, but minimize what you need to make the decision. Set in advance, what is it that we're really trying to get out of this interview and who absolutely has to be there, instead of saying, oh, you want to join us? You want to join us? And just bringing everybody to the party, right? Because the more people you bring, the more intimidating it is for them. And know in advance, like, what that agenda is going to look like, who's going to ask the question, what the purpose of the question is. Don't just come in and ask questions to ask questions.
Yeah, and oftentimes I think too, if there's multiple rounds of interviews, to ensure that your teams are focusing on different elements of the core competencies of that you want that candidate to have, or the team dynamics, and understanding what those core competencies might be. Yeah. And if there's 4 core competencies, and maybe have one person interview for that core competency, and then a second and third and a fourth, so it's not duplicated.
Right.
Have you ever been in an interview and they ask the same questions? I mean, certainly time, prepare for the one that says, so tell us about yourself. I mean,
right. Yeah, we had a customer recently say, okay, so we're going to have some knockout questions that we're asking the candidate. Should we also put those in our special instructions to the interviewer? And it was like, we don't need to ask the same questions to the candidate a second time. They're going to think they're stuck in a vortex, and we're, hey, didn't I answer these once? It's okay. If you've gotten the answers already, let's just, let the hiring manager know that they answered them correctly the first time. Not necessary. Yeah. Design the process with the candidate in mind. Technology professionals are familiar with user experience. And as recruiting professionals, if we put that user experience hat on, when I work with our support center team and our product team, I do this activity, right? A peanut butter and jelly sandwich making activity. Have you ever done this in like a team building activity? So you hand them a loaf of bread and a bottle of peanut butter and a jar of jelly. And you say, make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich like you've never made one before. Don't do anything that the other person doesn't expressly tell you to do. So when somebody says, put the peanut butter on the bread, you literally take the loaf of bread and hold it in your hand and you put the jar of peanut butter on the bread. Oh. Because the user experience is you're just setting the jar on there, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to be specific. You have to break the user experience down into like you've never made the sandwich before. You use the tie to take out the piece of bread, etc. And so design the recruiting process, design the interview experience as somebody with a fresh perspective, somebody that you want to have that lasting thought and that lasting positive brand experience as well. So it's a little bit of a marketing hat, right? A little bit of that product engineering, user experience hat.
I think the question might come to mind, how come you don't just have somebody from internally, a tech professional from the team, do the pre-screening? Why have to hire another company? And I had Todd Davis actually on a couple of these shows. He's on our board of directors as well, our board of advisors, and he was talking about how they re-engineered the interview process, because what they were finding was a lot of the candidates weren't making it through past certain panel interviews. And oftentimes it kind of comes down to the bias and the egos of the interviewers. If they are, maybe it's their project, or, they're bringing somebody on, but, egos can play a big role in whether or not somebody is brought onto a team, and whether they feel like maybe they're intimidated by that person, or maybe they're not a team player. Or I've seen teams actually set up really, really difficult tasks in an interview that they knew no one would be able to solve. Like whether it's like, I think it was in an infrastructure team where they had them come in and there was these cables and like this wired spaghetti mess, and they said, okay, fix it. And, the four guys just sat there and watched this potential candidate try to figure out something, but they knew they wouldn't be able to fix it. They just wanted to see if the guy would turn around and ask for help. And I think setting people up for failure and just seeing how they deal with a frustrating situation. Certainly there's many thoughts on whether or not that is ethical even. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Amanda.
Right. Yeah, I have the data over time will tell, right? But I do think that there is extreme validity in bringing a third party to the table to validate technical experience. And I've had some discussions with some of our corporate hiring managers around that same concept, where they see a path to increasing diversity in their hiring process, because they can kind of abstract the location of the candidate. They can ignore, the college, the prior employers, and really just focus on the technical acumen and be more objective around, can the person do what they claim they can do? And so that independent perspective, I think, is something over time that if companies will embrace having a third party, could be something really amazing for diversity inclusion.
Totally. That was going to be the next thing, like the diversity and the inclusion, and just the rates there that in those interviews that you often are faced with the bias, and that's where the stumbling block, the bottleneck happens, and overcoming that with solutions such as this it's brilliant. So very good. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's been really, really educational, and I really appreciate you being on the show. Amanda, if anybody wants to get hold of, what's that?
My pleasure. Thank you.
If anybody wants to get hold of you, how can they do that?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. Just look me up, Amanda Cole, eTeki. You'll find me.
Yeah, Amanda Cole on LinkedIn. That's what everybody says. They're all like, I'm on LinkedIn. And the website, if you want to give everybody the name of the website.
Sure, thank you. It's eTeki.com, ETEKI.com. And we appreciate the time that you've shared with us today, Stacy.
What I like about this is offering software engineers who maybe we can't use for particular roles, if they're looking, an opportunity to do other work. I mean, I think it almost reminds me of like Uber driver, like, somebody's doing something, they have their own job, but maybe want a side hustle. So that maybe they can like, drive an Uber or something, or, work for Uber Eats, so I think it's just a really, it's like an additional way to make money. So I like
they can
that.
use their mind. Yeah.
They
can use their
potentially networking. I mean, right?
Yeah, most definitely. So very cool. Definitely send your tech connections to us. We appreciate that.
Wonderful. Well, if you'd like to hear about, watch the show again, you can see it on TechRecruit.io, where we post the replays of all of our shows. And next week's schedule will be up there as well. Every Wednesday, we're back here with the Talent Analytics Show, and every Tuesday with Dueling Sourcers. And October 20th through the 22nd is Talent Congress 2020. And you, of course, can find all the agenda and all the information for that on the TechRecruit.io website. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody next week. Have yourself a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.